let's jump into this. Let me just quickly make sure it's showing on the screen here as well. Yes, it is. Okay, nice. So, explain how the author portrays Brian's initial despair. Okay. The author, Paulson, helps convey Brian's initial despair throughout the first 2 chapters by using repetition and hyperbole. Okay, so I like the techniques. The word alone, and he was alone. Alone is repeated, emphasizing Brian's shaken realization that he is all by himself in the woods. Wow, I like the analysis. Very to the point and nice and clear. The realization reflects his loss of hope in surviving in solitude. Very nice analysis. I think this is, again, it's showing his despair, loss of hope. Great. Very good analysis. Furthermore, the hyperbole in seconds that became all his life exaggerates the extent of the tension he was feeling at that moment. Wow. Again, very nice. He feels despair from the burden of having to fly a bush plane 1,000 feet above the air with a pilot that has been overcome by a heart attack. The initial complication created Brian's despair throughout the first few chapters. Okay, so my only comment is we wouldn't put the techniques in the point sentence. You want to just make your point clear. You really only want techniques to kind of be mentioned when you're actually using it. So even saying the word alone, you don't really need to say like, oh, the word alone is repeated. You can kind of just say, the repetition, he was alone, emphasizes Brian's shaken realization. Okay. Since there's a full stop there, there's a little bit of blurred lines about, since we have a full stop there, it's technically the end of a sentence. So, I'll put a comma there so we can continue the sentence. The repetition, he was alone, emphasizes Brian's shaken realization. Do you see how I'm just saying the technique, and that's the only real time I need to mention it? Okay. But this one is good as well. This one's perfectly the way that I would implement that. And then here and here, yeah, you wouldn't mention these in the first sentence. So the author Paulson helps convey Brian's initial despair throughout the first chapters. I think I'll just get rid of this. And then what I would probably do is this part here, you're kind of now giving the context of when he would feel despair. I feel like that probably would be good to have before you go through the evidence. So maybe helps convey Brian's initial despair in response to the burden of having to fly a bush plane thousands of feet above the air. Okay? And then that could be your point sentence, for instance. One piece of advice, I'm not necessarily saying it here, but in general, when I read through high school essays, a lot of my feedback is that there's too much storytelling. You want to keep your storytelling to a minimum, okay? In general, that is what I would say is good advice to keep in mind. If you're always kind of trying to think in mind, like, oh, Colin's not going to like this storytelling. Obviously, some context is needed, but there isn't really a point where you need to be describing several lines of what happens in a plot. It's more to get to the analysis, okay? Like, this stuff is worth a lot more than recapping the plot. Really, recapping the plot isn't really worth anything, okay? Because once you recap the plot, you have to give a quote to give it evidence anyway, and that is your evidence, okay? So, in general, I'm not saying it here. I just thought it would be a good opportunity to mention it. Avoid storytelling. This is all I think you would need. The author, Paulson, helps convey Brian's initial despair in response to the burden of having to fly a bush plane thousands of feet above the air. The shocking burden. Let's even spice it up more. Then I think the rest is really, really good. I really like your analysis. Keep that up. And then we don't really need to give this consequence. The initial complication created Brian's despair throughout the first year. Yeah, that links it up well enough. Again, links aren't that important to get right. It just needs to kind of be there as a structural tick box, like they have linked it back. Okay, cool. So do you understand from that the notes that I would take is minimize storytelling. The topic is this here. That was the question. This is Hatchet, the novel. And we were just answering some questions in response to Hatchet. Okay? And so he was feeling very despaired over the first few chapters. We're trying to answer why. So minimize storytelling / description. I don't really think that's a big thing here, but I want to write it down. And then never mention your techniques or quotes or specifics in your point sentence. Save it for when you actually use it. So really, if you want to use that technique, you want to just use it the once. You want to just mention it the once that you're actually going to use it. Just like repetition, it's only going to be mentioned here when we actually use it. Okay, so now we so the other thing is mention techniques save it for when you actually okay. Yeah, I think that's all I would say from there. So let's have a look at the next one. Paulson shows the effects of Brian's family issues on his own mental state. Okay, so again, techniques here. Divorce, secrets, fights, split. Very nice wording of what that is. Repetitive, short, and abrupt sentences. In which it shows the impact on Brian's thoughts. His constant cycle of repeating those words on his family issues highlight his overwhelmed state. Nice. This is very, very good. Mental state, questions about his mental state. Yeah, nice. Memory was like a knife cutting deep into him. Compares the memory's impacts on his mental state to a knife. Okay, so another piece of information that I would give you guys is you never need to explain what a technique means. So really, when you say this word simile and you put the quote, you are implying this. You are kind of telling us this, okay? So you don't need to explain, oh, this is the simile. He's actually comparing this and this in the novel. You would go on and keep this part. So you would kind of say the simile, the memory was like a knife cutting deep into him, highlights, what did you say? Highlights how these past recollections are cutting deep into him. Okay? So actually just showing the effect. Not saying he's comparing the memory to a knife, because that's basically what the quote is. The quote is still part of our sentence, you know? We still have the memory was like a knife cutting deep into him. We don't need to say the memory was like a knife cutting deep into him after the quote. So this highlights how these past recollections were cutting deep. Again, we'd probably reword this given that's the same in the quote. So were, scathing or were painful to relive. Demonstrates the impact it has had on Brian. The author highlights the constant reminders and flashbacks to show the effect on Brian's mental state. Nice. Yep. Link again does the job. Okay. Let me have a look. Again, I don't think this person actually made this many spelling mistakes. I think it is just the way it imported the spaces. I think it estimates the spaces and sometimes it takes spaces away. But congratulations on doing those. On those. Okay, cool. So now let's have a look at another one. The next one. This is very small, I know. So let me think. Maybe I'll go through this one, but I'll screenshot it and blow it up. Okay, so here we go. Okay. Is that still too small, guys? Oh my gosh, what is happening? Okay. Can you guys read that, or is that too small? Maybe I'll download this and then I'll open on a PDF. Sorry about this. I didn't expect it to just convert onto the Word doc very poorly. Okay, I think this should be a little bit better. Can you guys see that now? Let me widen it a bit. Is that a bit more visible? Yes? Okay. Again, yes, I know the font makes it a bit difficult. People are always experimenting with random fonts. Okay, anyway, it's okay. I will read it out anyway, and I'll give you guys the same, thoughts that I am giving. So, yeah. Okay, so let's run through that. Give me 1 second. I just need to get that. I'm juggling so many different things. Okay. So, within chapters 5 to 7 of Hatchet, Paulson effectively portrays Brian's overwhelming despair as he struggles to accept his situation. After the crash, Brian collapses emotionally, shown when he cried until his body was exhausted and there were no more tears left. This use of emotional exhaustion reveals how deeply fear and hopelessness consume him. Wow, great analysis there. Okay, great analysis there. And I really like your point sentence as well. Furthermore, Paulson enhances Brian's despair through internal thoughts like he thought he would die there alone and nobody would know. This fearful thought reflects his belief that he is isolated and forgotten, amplifying his panic. Wow, very, very nice there. The repetition of negative thinking. Okay, so one thing I would suggest is I feel like the techniques could be a little bit more direct, like actual techniques. I feel like emotional exhaustion isn't something that I would necessarily think of as a technique. Now, I'm not someone that thinks that you always need a technique. Some English teachers think that way. You don't always need a technique, okay? But it is good if there is a technique in the quote. So I feel like this one is quite, he cried until his body was, and there were no more tears left. That's quite, I would say, you could say that's hyperbole. Does anyone remember what is hyperbole? No more tears left. I don't know if you guys know the biology of the lacrimal duct and how tears are produced, but I would say that you could safely say this is exaggeration. And it really emphasizes it. So even by just saying this use of emotional hyperbole reveals how, it just adds an extra layer of analysis when you're using a technique that's a little bit more like a actual figurative technique, that kind of thing. And so I think that's, but apart from that, your analysis is really good. So I'm not someone that's going to take away from your analysis because you don't have a technique or the technique isn't like an official technique, but just keep in mind there are some times where you can use it and it's a very easy way to bump up your analytical power. Okay, so so I think that's good. Repetition of negative thinking. I feel like as well, you could, my advice for the technique I would use when you have a really like depressing sounding quote, he thought he would die there alone and nobody would know. You could just say the very like pessimistic tone. So you can always use tone as a technique when someone's used very depressive tone. Okay. What's the word? It'll come to me. Anyway, other words, adjectives you can use for tone. Okay. All right. So then we move on to again, I didn't read all of it, sorry, but I just want to get the main ideas so we can move on to the slides. We didn't have a look at a number 3. So why might Paulson have chosen to set this story in nature rather than in a city or a suburb? Okay. So remember, this linked back to his kind of overarching purpose that we were talking about. So let's have a look. Paulson's decision to set Hatchet in the wilderness rather than city emphasizes Brian's emotional isolation, great, and his journey of self-discovery. Okay, really good point sentence here. Very, very direct to the point. In nature, he cannot rely on anyone else, which reinforces his loneliness. Shown when the lake was silent, uncaring, as if his pain didn't matter. Good, we got a technique here. Personification of the lake as uncaring underscores that the natural world offers no emotional comfort, mirroring how Brian feels forgotten by his parents and society. Wow, very, very high level analysis here. Okay, this is a nice exemplar in terms of analysis. Additionally, the setting becomes a place of emotional clarity when in the forest there were no lies, no secrets, only survival. The capitalization of secrets links directly to his family trauma, suggesting that nature strips away distractions and forces him to face reality. For the reader, the wilderness becomes symbolic of Brian's eternal struggle and eventual growth. Paulson likely chose a setting to show that isolation in nature pushes individuals to confront their fears and mood. Okay, so I think sometimes a little bit tripping over the words with like very verbose. Like it seems that this person's either spent a very, very long time putting together complicated words. So sometimes just remember, guys, if it's going to take too much time, you can just be a little bit more to the point and simpler. But obviously, it's very good analysis. I don't have much feedback to give. Just keep in mind, it might be better to be a bit more direct with your language.